everyone! Hi, Emily! I'm so glad you could make it. And of course, hello, Fenos. Always good to see you, because I see you always with these.
And hello from the other side.
Oh, I'm so glad you could make it. Um, hello, hello. Uh, so today's topic is, of course, a topic of my Wednesday post. Hello, Justin! Which is, of course, self diagnosis and why I accept it. Um, to start off, I think it best to address some arguments against self diagnosis and my response to that. One of the arguments is that people just self diagnose, they pretend to be autistic to excuse bad behavior. Um, Many people will bring up, abusers who have self diagnosed and, you know, said, oh, I can't help my abusive behavior, it's my autism, and stuff like that. Although, usually, the language they use is they use, like, what about psychopaths? Or what about, oh, what was the other term? Oh, what is that when you're really into yourself? What is that?
Do you mean like someone who is narcissistic?
Yes, they use like what are psychopaths or narcissists, and it's just those are actual like disorders, and probably best to not like not every abuser is a psychopath or narcissist, and not every narcissist or psychopath is an abuser. So when you mean abuser, say abuser. To say to call like automatically assume an abuser is a psychopath or narcissist is ableism. So if you want to say mean abuser, just say abuser. But anyways, so I remember having a comment from someone who at first didn't accept self-diagnosis because of an abusive ex of theirs. Right after the commenter got diagnosed, their ex self diagnosed themselves as autistic. And anytime the ex was abusive, they would say, oh, I can't change my behavior because my autism. Eventually, I did convince that person that even though what their ex did was wrong, it was unfair to compare every diagnosed person, self-diagnosed person, to their ex. Because you had a bad, instance with one person doesn't mean that's going to be happening with every person who self-diagnosed. These sorts of situations need to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Since I'm confident in saying that they are the extreme minority, and it's usually pretty easy to tell that they're just using the label of autistic to excuse abuse. Are there some autistic people who are abusive? Yes, of course there are. Anyone can be abusive. However, it's usually pretty easy to tell when someone is or is not autistic. However, some people who have a propensity to deny self-diagnosis will just say, oh, I can tell when someone is or is not autistic, and will just use flimsy excuses. That's what I've found. But when it comes to people using it to excuse bad behavior, this isn't a self-diagnosed autistic problem. This is just some people are bad kind of problem. Um, Now, one big issue. I'm just gonna do a trigger warning right now about vehicular murder and a man by the name of Alec Minassian. Some of you may know who this is. Basically, a Toronto man rented a van drove it into a crowd. He killed 10 and injured 16. He is in court right now. And his lawyers are using his autism as an excuse. They're saying basically because he's autistic, he can't be held criminally responsible for his actions. Because, oh, he didn't know what he's doing because he's just autistic. And it's just, his autism is being used as an excuse to let him get away with murder. This is a diagnosed autistic person. And yet, people who are against self-diagnosis will say that self-diagnosed people use this. That they will use this to excuse bad behavior. When there are diagnosed autistics who are using it to excuse bad behavior. So the argument of people self-diagnosing just to excuse bad behavior, if you're going to use that excuse, you cannot leave out the autistic people who do the exact same thing. Thankfully, this is not a common thing. It is very uncommon. Another argument I hear is people who are doing it for attention. You know, they self-diagnose because they want everybody to pay attention to them. Look at me, I'm autistic, tee-hee-hee. I'm so quirky and different. But here's the thing, self-diagnosed autistics don't just wake up one day and decide that they're autistic. These are people who have spent their lives wondering, why am I like this? Why do I do this? Emily, that is actually a great point. With that court case, Emily wrote, yeah, that's a big yikes. And he and his lawyers are going to make it worse for autistic people everywhere. Society will get the impression that we're all capable of van attacks and whatnot. Exactly. It's giving autistics a bad name. But back to my point I was making. You know, self-diagnosed autistics don't just wake up one day, say they're autistic. They've, much like a lot of us, we're wondering why they are like they are. They spend their lives being called, freaks, weirdos, lazy, all that stuff, and not knowing why. But one way or another, whether it be from someone suggesting that it might be autistic, or their child gets diagnosed and their child acts a lot like they did growing up, or they come across the autistic community after getting diagnosed with something else like ADHD, or some other way, they get the idea that they might be autistic, which leads them to researching the crap out of autism. People who self-diagnose don't just go, I think I might be autistic. Well, I guess that means I'm autistic. Time to do zero research. No, these people want answers. So they research autism in hopes of finding it. So many people just think that self-diagnosed people are just like, yeah, I'm autistic because I just felt like it. Or that they've done zero research. You know, they just want the label to have the label and don't know anything about autism. When in reality, they often know a lot. It's just, I know when, so I was diagnosed at 17, but I didn't really know what it meant to be autistic until I was 30 or 31. I can't remember. I think it was 31. I can't remember. But basically, it was when I found out that being bipolar, like being diagnosed bipolar, was a common misdiagnosis for basically a common misdiagnosis for people who were assigned female at birth. Autistic people who were assigned female at birth. And for all these years, I had thought I was bipolar. And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh. And a light just turned on. And I researched the heck out of autism. Yes, I already had a diagnosis, but I didn't know what that meant for so many years. And people who self-diagnose, they do the same thing. They're like, oh wow, this is like me. Like, they see something online, or again, like with my dad, he sought out a diagnosis because his grandson made him, like, his grandson was diagnosed. And he's like, wow, my grandson is a lot like me. Maybe I'm autistic. And that's the thing, is like, many self-diagnosed people, many of them are trying to get a diagnosis as well. A lot of them are, on the path to getting a diagnosis. It just takes a long time for some people. It can take years. They seek these diagnoses because they did their research. They realized that, yes, they are autistic. And they were, some people who are diagnosed were once self-diagnosed. Like, they self-diagnosed and then sought out a diagnosis and got it. Some of them had to wait years. Some had to pay tons of money, or both. This isn't a situation of attention seeking. This is a situation of answer seeking. They just want to know. They just want answers. And for me, if something's going on and I don't know what it is, I want to know. I will research it. Sadly, this sometimes feeds into my medical paranoia, but thankfully, I have a wonderful spouse who will get my feet back on the ground when things go too far.
That does happen sometimes.
But that's just me and my own issues. But yeah, it's just self-diagnosed autistics aren't just these child-minded people who just want to be special, so they just slap the label of autistic on themselves. I've read comments of people thinking, oh, this TikToker, he says they're autistic, but no, they can't be. They're just seeking attention. And it's like, who are you to say that? Who are you to say that they're not diagnosed? Who are you to say that they're not autistic? They just don't have a diagnosis. But yeah, it's just also another thing I should bring up, sort of, Well, Fenno's bringing up there are other disorders that exist, but autism is the most prevalent in shows and whatnot. Not that the immediate go-to is autism, but there are people who think they're autistic. They self-diagnose. They put themselves into the autistic community and realize they're not autistic. But by joining the autistic community, it helps lead them to finding out what it is, whether they're bipolar or have ADHD or borderline personality disorder. Is self-diagnosis of autism led them to the proper diagnosis. Yeah, Emily saying, I feel that bad doctors are bad. Enough experiences with them can make someone really struggle to trust medical practitioners. Yeah, you do have situations where some doctors, not all, I've met some wonderful doctors, who will dismiss certain things, and especially if you're looking for, I know there have been people who have been denied a referral to get a diagnosis simply because the doctor that would have to do the referral just dismisses it entirely. But yeah, one argument that I've heard that is so ridiculous. I've heard it multiple times. And it just blows my mind. It's people who are like, hey, if people can self-diagnose as autistic, what's stopping people from self-diagnosing themselves with cancer? I have heard this more than once. Why? It's just, for some reason, people think this is a good argument. They think it's a marvelous gotcha. And it's just like, first, let me say that comparing autism to cancer is not a good way to start your argument. It is a good way to tick someone off, especially an autistic person. Autism is not cancer. No matter how much Autism Speaks wants you to think that it's just as bad as cancer, it isn't. But secondly, cancer... Justin, can I self-diagnose as dead? But yeah, the thing is, cancer has physical proof. You can go get tested for cancer, and, you might have a tumor, and they can test for cancer cells. There aren't any autism cells that you can test for. And you can't just get a blood test and be like, yep, you have autism. You can't get an MRI. There's no test to physically test for autism. It doesn't have any physical traits. It's why the phrase, you don't look autistic, is so infuriating. It's just, I can't believe I actually had to bring this argument up. And it's just ridiculous that people would think it's a good argument that self-diagnosed autistic equals self-diagnosed as cancer. That it's just as bad, or, it's just ridiculous. So, now that I've dealt with those arguments, it's sort of, Justin, sometimes I feel like a zombie. Same. Hard same. Especially before I got treated for sleep apnea. Before I got my CPAP, I'd sleep for like 10 hours and then have to nap throughout the day. Ugh. But yeah, so one reason that someone might um, self-diagnose. Well, the main reason why people self-diagnose, if not the only reason, getting a diagnosis can be incredibly difficult. Hello, transit prodigy. Um, getting a diagnosis can be incredibly difficult, especially if you're not a white cis guy. Specifically a boy, because it's harder for adults. If you are a person of color, or a woman, or non-binary, or trans, or an adult, a diagnosis can be such a struggle to get. In the past, autism was only really researched in boys. I'm sorry you missed the first 15 minutes, but no, I'm not going to repeat myself. When this is posted, made public, you can watch it. Yes, First Nations people as well. Very difficult to get a diagnosis. For those who don't know, First Nations is the Canadian way of saying a native. But yeah, it's just, back in the day, in the past, autism was really only researched in boys. This is why people to this day still believe that autism is 4 to 5 times more common in boys, when in reality, the diagnosis is simply more common. It wasn't until recently that people started researching how autistic behaviors manifested in people who weren't cis boys. I've literally had women comment that they were denied a diagnosis because they were told that women couldn't be autistic. And, it's just, to be denied a diagnosis simply because of your gender. What are people supposed to do next? I guess they could try and get a second opinion. But what happens if they saved up thousands of dollars, went to get diagnosed, and they were told, no, you're not autistic? Because vagina. It's, people don't think of this when they say, when they deny people their self-diagnosis, they don't think of the barriers that are put in place. So often, if you don't act like the stereotypical autistic boy, well, I guess you can't be autistic. Women and people who were assigned female at birth are 3 to 4 times more likely to mask. Men do mask. It does happen. It's just more common in women. And it makes it so it's harder for others to see that they're autistic because they're hiding so much of their autistic traits when they're in public. I'm someone who masks. I mask a lot because for so long, that was just, I didn't even know I was doing it, and now it's just natural. The second I walk out my door, or someone walks in my door, that mask goes on, and I can't help it. There are only a handful of people who I can take my mask off in front of. Justin, yeah, a lot of people say you're just so super socially anxious and it makes me annoyed. Yeah, that would annoy me too. But yeah, and here's the thing. I don't think the whole, like, people say, you know, female autism or male autism, you know, sort of like male autism are these traits, well, female autism is this trait, are these traits. And I don't think it's due to physical or psychological differences between genders. I think it has more to do with how someone is conditioned in their childhood due to their assigned gender. You know, people who are assigned female at birth, um, Justin, to people who say you're just super socially anxious, what you say to those people, I guess one thing you could say is that you could say, I know myself better than you know me. Or you can say something like, being socially anxious, Emily got to it before I did. Yes, social anxiety is a common autistic trait. Just being like, if someone goes, you just are super socially anxious, you could go, yeah, because I'm autistic. But yeah, but, you know, is depending on what gender you're assigned at birth, you are raised differently. You are conditioned differently as you grow up. You know, people who are assigned female at birth, who were assigned female at birth, whether they are still female or not, are more likely to be disciplined for acting out. It's the whole boys will be boys mentality. We're more likely to be pressured into presenting ourselves in a more socially acceptable way. We're told to act like young ladies instead of children. And this may be the reason why we tend to mask more often. Because for us, not masking resulted in discipline more often than with people who were assigned male at birth. They're less likely to be disciplined for acting out. Are there physical, psychological things when it comes to autism and your sex? It's possible. We don't know enough. But, you know, and it's just sorry, Ween Dalbin. Sorry, this is off topic at the moment, but I find it odd that married people with children self-diagnose themselves with a social disorder. Are they just masking? They might be. Because I know that there are a lot of people who have children who do self-diagnose because as they watch their child grow up and their child gets diagnosed, they go, oh, you know, they're exactly like me, I must have that. But I'm wondering if, you know, I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, is, like, I know boys do get disciplined for acting out. It's just, they're allowed to get away with more childish behavior than girls. You know, a girl is more likely to get disciplined for roughhousing than a boy. You know, so it is, of course, changing. You know, the whole gender roles thing. Less and less people are going for it, and I'm hoping that leads to more and more girls not masking. But we'll see. Again, this is me hypothesizing when it comes to the connection between autism and sex. But yeah, is like the thing I wonder. Like, I was misdiagnosed as bipolar. But had I been born a boy, would I have been diagnosed earlier? You know, I know, like, I was diagnosed as bipolar because it runs in my family. But also, it's just sort of, it is a common misdiagnosis for, you know, people who were assigned female at birth. You know, common misdiagnosis for autistic people like that. Justin, I'm super quiet in many situations because too many times I get left out if I show too much of myself. I was a lot like that when I was a teenager. I actually, like, even in my 20s, it wasn't until I started surrounding myself with people who accepted me for who I was that I started really opening up. But no, I get that. Mel H, do you have thoughts about bipolar responses to antidepressants? What do you mean exactly? Like, bipolar responses as in, how bipolar people respond to antidepressants? Well, Fenos, new fourth wave feminist quality. Autistic feminism. Nice. But yeah, Mel, could you be more specific by what you mean? By bipolar responses to antidepressants. Because when it comes to if a bipolar person is given antidepressants and they react negatively, that could be the many meds cause hypomania, yeah. So I have a couple family members who are bipolar who are or were on medication. Um, it depends on the medication because each medication can have completely different, you know, side effects for different people. But yeah, I'm sure there are some antidepressants who will cause some bipolar people to have hypomania, sorry, but not all. And different meds may cause different bipolar people to have hypomania. This is the thing is one thing my dad said was psychiatry is more of a black magic than a science because you have to figure out what works with certain people. You know, antidepressants intensify sensory effects and can lead to dissociation and impulsivity. Yeah. You know, that's the thing is it really is you have to find what works for what person because everybody's brain chemistry is different. You know, you had similar responses to mood stabilizers too, though. Yeah, it's so, you know, different. You know, it's just what works for some people doesn't work for others. And you need to find out what works. You know, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say, you know, this med will do this and this med will do that. However, from what I've learned from my own experience, from my own family history, is that it's all about trying to find the right one that works. Because, yeah. You want to talk?
Just wanted to mention one thing about the way meds react differently to other people. One that I know has come up is a med that is known as Lexapro. I have seen many people react very negatively towards that. However, in the midst of the pandemic that's been going on, I fell into a spiral of depression and anxiety. The doctor who I saw here in China assigned me Lexapro, and for me, it's been fantastic. I haven't felt significantly different from how I usually do. Only the worst of anxiety and depression have been cut away. However, I also know people who say they feel like they can't feel anything on it, that they feel like an entirely different person. And it doesn't matter who you are. The medications, as has been said, affect people differently, which is why it's less a perfect science and you literally have to resort to trial and error to a degree because you do react to them differently. I reacted positively. That is not always going to end up being the case. But where it does become positive, that's where you go with it for a time to see if it helps you in the long run.
Alrighty. Thank you. But yeah, that's basically it when it comes to medication. It's trial and error. You know. Personally, to bring down my panic and anxiety, I've been taking Zoloft. And I don't know if that works for other people or doesn't work for others. You know. But yeah, it's just sort of, yeah. So anyways, I hope that helps. I've seen Ritalin be brought up a couple of times. My sister was put on Ritalin and was taken off by my mother because it had such bad side effects. You know. So, back on topic. Basically, as I was saying, you know, yeah, when I have panic attacks, is it lorazepam that I take for my panic attacks?
Yes.
Yeah, it's lorazepam. So, fun fact, lorazepam knocks me unconscious. When I have a panic attack, I take it, and I'm usually asleep like an hour. Like, when I first had to start taking it for my panic attacks, basically it made me fall asleep a lot faster. But I guess you can't have a panic attack if you are unconscious, so I guess it works. But yeah, so back on the topic of self-diagnosis. As I was saying, one thing that, gets in the way of a diagnosis, why some people self-diagnose, because they can't get a diagnosis. They're either denied or misdiagnosed due to them being a person of color. In the United States, sadly, I can only, Phanos, failed successfully, knocked me unconscious, not having a panic attack anymore. But I can only, when it comes to people of color being denied, not getting diagnosed with autism, I can't speak from personal experience because I am white. I am Whitey McWhiteface. And I could, I looked it up. I looked up stats, and I could only really find stuff in the United States because I feel this hasn't been researched enough. But essentially, in the United States, white children are 19% more likely to be diagnosed autistic than black children, and 65% more likely to be diagnosed than Hispanic children. Again, I can only really talk about numbers, about studies, because, again, I have no personal experience with this. And I haven't really gotten many personal stories from people of color in my comments or DMs. But I did do a comic about it. Um, you know, about how, a person came up to me, well, messaged me, and asked me to make a comic about how, you know, people of color are less likely to get diagnosed. And when this person commented, when they messaged me and told me about this, I had never heard of this. I didn't know that people of color were, less likely to get diagnosed because it was never a problem with me. And it opened my eyes to the fact that I didn't know this shows that this is not talked about enough. And it's just, the fact of the matter is autistic people of color are more likely to go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And they are, well, Finos, you're saying, as a person who lives in the American South, people of color not being diagnosed is a cultural thing, but above all else is a financial thing. I actually, during my research, found that in the years, autism diagnoses have been going up for everyone, including people of color. And they actually found that the rate increased similarly between poor people and wealthy people. So it may not purely be a financial thing. I can't speak on whether it's a cultural thing or not. But it's probably a whole host of things. A whole host of reasons. It may be cultural, it may be financial, it may be racism. But the fact that I hadn't heard about it shows that, autistic people of color are underrepresented in the autistic community. Because I had never heard this story until the person messaged me. I had never heard of a person of color not being diagnosed or being denied a diagnosis. Transit Prodigy. I know a lot of people of color that have been diagnosed with autism, though I'm not dismissing what you said at all. On the contrary, I know more people of color that are diagnosed. Is that weird? No, it may just be where you live. I'm not saying that people of color don't get diagnosed. I'm just saying that they get diagnosed at a lower rate.
Think of it in this regard. When you join a community, more times than not, you will end up acquiring friends who are part of that community. For example, I am definitely part of the LGBTQ, whatever acronyms you want to use for it, GSRM, etc. And I know that, strangely enough, despite percentile-wise being significantly less of the population, back when I lived in Canada, I discovered nearly all my friends were part of it. And it was like, hey, this is statistically anomalous. But, I mean, when you're part of that community, when you have ties into that community, you will find those who are like you, because we seek those who are like us. It's I honestly feel part of human nature to a degree, simply because, I mean, having been teaching for a while now, a lot of kids who have like-minded traits and things that they enjoy are going to seek each other out. We just do it. That's part of why you're going to find it. And even if it feels like we're not totally sure, in the end, it's going to be still a lower percentage of the population overall, but completely real for you. So it will be one of those, hey, this doesn't feel quite in line with the numbers, but it's completely true, completely your reality, but still statistically anomalous.
Thank you. But yeah, I found that a lot of the friends I've made have, started wondering, oh, am I autistic? And I'm wondering if I just, without meaning to, made a bunch of friends who are autistic and just weren't diagnosed yet. um, but yeah, um, honestly, like, when it comes to people of color, I feel that their voices need to be elevated. We need to hear their stories more. You know, I'm up on Facebook, I'm part of a lot of autism groups. And, it's just that not hearing about this, I just feel like these sorts of stories need to be pushed more into the open. Now, one thing that has been brought up is cost. Um, there are places, some countries, where diagnosis can be really expensive. Even in countries where they have public health care. In Canada, it cost um, money. I've heard people in Canada be like, say that they had to pay. In Australia, I hear people having to have to pay a lot of money even if their country has public health care. Um, uh, Transit Prodigy, I want everyone in the chat to know you're pretty / handsome, you matter, and you're loved. Can I get an ooh ooh ooh? um, but yeah, and then of course we get countries like the United States where they don't have public health care, and where even before the pandemic, 78% of the population was already living paycheck to paycheck. So if you don't have insurance, or if you have insurance and it doesn't cover enough, saving up for a diagnosis can take years. A diagnosis can cost thousands of dollars. And, there are self-diagnosed people who are doing just that. They are saving up. To tell these people that their self-diagnosis isn't valid because they're poor, well, that's just classist. It's just, I remember there was a fight in my comments once on Instagram. Instagram is where I get most of my comments, which is cool. But essentially what happened was someone was saying how self-diagnosis was not valid. And it turns out they didn't realize that there were countries where people would have to pay thousands of dollars to get a diagnosis. They didn't realize because they didn't pay. I believe this person was a teenager. And it's just, they didn't know how much it could cost. And that's the thing. it costs a lot for some people. So basically, final point, there are so many reasons why someone can't get a formal diagnosis. I've only covered a few of them. I didn't cover how there are some countries where it's literally impossible to get a diagnosis as an adult. The second you reach adult age, there are no doctors who will diagnose you. And that's another reason. Mel, children can get funded diagnosis in Ontario. That's where I'm from. But adults have limited options. My dad got diagnosed in his 60s, and I don't think he paid for it. I don't know what happened or why. But yeah, is even in Ontario where I am from, you know, but yeah, is, is adults, yeah, they have the limited options. But yeah. So it's just sort of, no matter where you live, yeah, of course, if you're on ODSP, that's, Ontario Disability Support Program. I was on that for several years. Is, to save up money was basically impossible. So if someone's on disability and they need a diagnosis for, they're on disability for one reason, but they want to get diagnosed autistic, disability probably won't cover that. And so you're asking people who are below the poverty line to save up money when that's basically impossible. When I was on ODSP, like halfway through the month, I was basically out of money. And, so it's just sort of to deny self-diagnosis. It's problematic for several reasons. Because someone can be denied diagnosis for so many reasons. They could be denied because they're a woman. They could be denied because they're trans. They could be denied because they're a person of color and the doctor they went to believes that, autism is a white people problem. There are so many reasons. But yeah. All right, Mel, I'm already on ODSP for related mental health issues, so it was more for my own records than in pursuing diagnosis. My appointment is on December 1st. Yay! I hope it goes well. Yeah, I know some people prefer to, they don't like the term self-diagnosis. They prefer to say that they are, self-discovered autistic or self-identified autistic. And that works too. I use self-diagnosis because it's the most common term used. It's the first one it's the first one I heard. It's the one more often. One thing I hear people say is they'd rather someone say, I suspect that I'm autistic, but haven't gotten diagnosed yet. And all I can say is, what do you think self-diagnosed means? It means I haven't been formally diagnosed yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm autistic. You know, when somebody says they're self-diagnosed, it means they haven't been formally diagnosed. And it's just funny that people are like, oh, you know, they shouldn't say they're self-diagnosed. They should say, I suspect I'm autistic. And it's just like, self-diagnosed means not diagnosed. So,
On that note, just speaking from experience here, and now that we're living in China, um, well, psychological medicine diagnoses like this are not really acknowledged pretty much at all. Like, to the point where there are multiple kids who have gone through the school since I've been there who are like, I want to get into psychology so I can bring this back here to China and spread mental health and understanding of this. We have encountered quite a few students in the school system where I am that are clearly exhibiting traits of the autistic spectrum. And when we do that, we often try to be, okay, like, so has anyone here spoken to them? Most of the time, almost without a doubt, it's a no. So we try to speak with them, we try to figure out what their quirks are, what works for them, and we try to help them as best as we can. But admittedly, because we aren't necessarily professionals in this regard, we are limited to a degree. But we are essentially semi having to, quote unquote, diagnose these kids who are exhibiting these traits because we've experienced something like this in North America or elsewhere where we've seen something like this happen. And it's a way that we try to reach out with extra support for these kids because, I mean, that's what teachers do. We try to make sure they succeed, or at least ideally, that's what a teacher should do. So, it's not just necessarily self-diagnosis that comes into play, especially in situations where others just don't experience any form of a chance of diagnosis. Others are going to try to figure out what's going on as well and try to help them in proxy. And, well, we work off of the best knowledge that we have, so sometimes we kind of do that too in support. So it's not just a self-diagnosis thing.
alrighty. I would like to say hello, Shimmer. I'm glad you could make it to the end, but um, but yeah, so last time I streamed, I made an oopsie, and I forgot to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my dad, my $10 patron. Big thanks to him, always supporting me, even now that I'm an adult. And, of course, the rest of my patrons. Big thanks. I appreciate you so much. Honestly, like, I'm not gonna lie, it still kind of blows my mind that, you know, people see my work and they're like, here, have money. And I can't thank you enough for that. You know, it's a big deal to me. So thank you. Big thank you. So I just want to thank you all for coming. I'm sorry, Shimmer, that you joined just for me to say my goodbyes. But this video will be going public on Wednesday. If you want to see it earlier, you can become a $5 patron and see it tomorrow. But yeah, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I love how much of the autistic community supports self-diagnosis. It always fills my heart with joy. Speaking of becoming a patron, don't do it if you can't afford it. If you are broke, use your money for better things. All right? Thank you all. Bye.